Welcome to Better Cybersecurity, the ISF podcast. I'm your host, Steve Durbin.
ISF Chief Executive Steve Durbin is an expert in leadership, business culture transformation, and cyber strategies for today's top enterprises. I'm producer Tavia Gilbert. Today's episode might sound a little bit different, but it's a really important conversation. Steve sits down with Emily Holyoake, co-founder of Not a Standard and the brain behind the Frame Network. They discuss the human harm of cyber attacks, gender-based violence, tech-facilitated abuse, and diversity in the cybersecurity industry. Steve also asks Emily to envision the future of the cyber workforce, one that creates safety for society and people, not just machines and data.
So in the cybersecurity industry, we're experts at hardening kernels, securing endpoints, all that sort of thing. But there's a layer of the stack that we often ignore, and that's the human experience. My guest today is Emily Holyoake, co-founder of Not a Standard, which is an ethical cybersecurity consultancy, and also the architect behind the SAFE framework. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Emily doesn't just look at how systems break, she looks at how they're used to harm. And with a background in cyber governance, risk and policy, she's challenging the industry to move beyond the infrastructure-first security and towards a model that protects people from exploitation, abuse and neglect. Emily, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always fun to talk to people about security and intelligence, especially what we do as well. I feel really lucky that we exist in this space and we get to share our love of security as well. So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Let's get straight into this SAFE framework and the human-centric risk that I mentioned in the introduction there. Now, most security frameworks view the user as a risk to be mitigated. That's traditionally the way we've always looked at it. Your framework shifts the focus, though, to protecting people from harm. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, SAFE is a framework in many ways is a bit of a misnomer. Really, it's the first application of what we call an adversarial behavior detection framework, but as an intelligence platform. So specifically in this case, we are focused on interpersonal harm. So that's abuse, exploitation, and neglect. But the best way probably to describe SAFE is what it's solving for. And yeah, we are absolutely not focused so much on the end user, but at the same time, very much focused on the end user or the individual that's experiencing harm or abuse or kind of anything else, the receiving end. But how I would best describe SAFE is everyone has this universal experience of you come across someone or you have an interaction, you think, why is this person doing this? Why are they acting this way? And whether that be you're an intelligence analyst and you're trying to figure out what an adversary is doing, or you're in the middle of a breach and you're like, what is going on? Or you're experiencing some cranky person with road rage, there always comes this thought of, why are they doing this? Even going back further than the usual rice, mice, reward ideology, coercion, ego, which is the typical kind of limit that intelligence goes to. What is fundamentally driving that person? Because when you can think about it that way and go a little bit deeper, you start to see the patterns and you're able to understand what it is that is, what the actual focus of that harm is. Because in reality, it's never actually about the victim or the target. It's always about the act or perpetrator. I say actor more than I say perpetrator, because what it is, it's really a person trying to fulfill a need for themselves. And when you start to see it that way, and that's not by any means giving a rationale or justifying harm in any case, but when you start to think of it as a person trying to fulfill a need, it's really easy to take away the emotion from what's happening and get to the root cause. And so SAFE is taking that understanding and acknowledging those behaviors and seeing that pattern of behavior, not from a point of placing blame, but actually understanding what a person's driver is beyond just their motivations. You can start to see the patterns and where things are going better than you can if you focused on just the impact and what you think is the intent of the actor.
So how does the approach to threat modeling change then when the asset you're protecting is a person's physical or mental safety rather than just bits and bytes?
For me personally, when I think about cybersecurity and as a reformed and recovering security consultant, I think there's no difference because at the end of the day, when you have a security breach, that data belongs to a human. And there's
Right.
been so many examples of a breach resulting in the loss of someone's life. So when I was in those roles where I was saying to someone like, no, a data breach is a really big deal, I had to frame it as there's a person at the end of that. Every attack begins and ends with a human, even with
Right.
AI in the mix. There's still going to be a human impact at the other end. And I don't think, as security consultants, for the most part, we really consider the existential impact that a data breach can have on a single life or multiple lives.
So if I'm, let's say, I don't know, a security architect listening to this now, how can I practically integrate the safe framework sort of perpetrator behavior lens, if you like, into my existing secure by design workflows? How do I get it to integrate and physically do something different?
The SAFE framework, as it is actually purely focused on modes, mechanisms of abuse. So we look at abuse, exploitation, neglect, force, whether that's psychological manipulation, and actually taking instead security methodologies that we have and we take for granted. So MITRE ATT&CK, Diamond Model, Lockheed
Mhm.
Martin kill chain, and using that as the basis for actually tackling things like domestic violence. So it's less about how do we apply this to security, but rather how do we take all of these security concepts and apply them to a domain that has none of that. But in
Mm.
saying that, the way that the SAFE framework, I say the SAFE framework, our taxonomy, we do talk about tactics and techniques and procedures, much off the basis of MITRE ATT&CK. We still do actually create six bundles of all of our tactics and techniques so that they
Mhm.
work with the typical CTI tools as well. So if you are in an IRM space, you can use that as a basis of, oh, look, here are different examples of how technology can be weaponized to harm an individual. Here's how tools are exploited. Here's how social engineering works and all of those sorts of things. So there is a way that it still works within the traditional cybersecurity environment, but really it's the inverse. It's how do we take all of these really wonderful structured frameworks and
Mhm.
use them in a space that needs the most, that hasn't had that lens applied to it before.
And for people listening to this, describe for us how big is this problem that we're trying to address?
Trillions. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has a counter of how much violence costs each year.
Right.
This accounts for war as well, might I add, but not in its sum total. And it doesn't fully consider the flow on effects either. And it's acknowledged in it as well. But it says that the global cost of interpersonal violence is somewhere between 15 and 17 trillion dollars per annum, which
Wow.
is insane. 300 million children per year will experience some form of abuse worldwide. One woman is murdered at the hands of a family member every 10 minutes globally. In Australia, that's one every 3 to 4 days. But the statistics, 1 in 3 women will experience some form of abuse in their lifetime. 1 in 6 men will experience some form of abuse in their lifetime. I think the statistics are, at least in Australia, 25% of young people will experience some form of tech facilitated abuse in their lifetime. And something like 46% of women in Australia will experience some form of sexual abuse or assault in their lifetime as well, which is a ridiculous statistic and only gets worse as time goes on.
I mean, the numbers are really quite horrific when you
Yes,
look at it like that, aren't they? I mean, you talk about 1 in 3, 1 in 6, those sorts of things. How did we end up in this place, do you think?
I think it is a culmination of lots of factors. When thinking about SAFE, and I mentioned this before, I don't want to take away the insurmountable impact of interpersonal harm.
Hmm.
But I think part of what it comes down to is what we call fundamental attribution error. And this is a perfectly normal thing. We try to find who is to blame for something and find a human, right? Instead of going, what did the system enable this to happen? And the perfect example of that is in cybersecurity. A person clicks on a phishing link that results in a breach.
Yeah.
So we blame the individual instead of thinking, what did the system literally or figuratively allow to happen that meant that person clicked on that link? But we think we've got to find the root cause. So we pick a human rather than thinking about what the system enabled. And the same goes for abuse, exploitation, neglect. What is enabling an individual to cause that level of harm? What is it that led that individual to think the only answer to my problems is to harm another person? And I think when we start thinking about it that way, we stop hurting more people in the process and we start focusing on preventing recidivism. How do we prevent this from happening in the first place? How do we help people find alternative pathways instead of using harm and abuse as the answer?
So it's much more about trying to get back to the root cause, as you've just said, rather than looking at it from the other side. And what are some of the insights that you can share with us about the progress that's been made towards that goal?
It's finally now coming to the collective consciousness that harm is not just a social issue and something that we can hide and push into a little box and leave to people. I think there was a really great, actually, Australian show, and they talked about the difference in language, specifically around domestic and family violence. And they said, why do we call it family violence and not domestic violence? And they say, because it's a family issue. It's not a domestic issue. It's not something that happens in the side. It's a family issue and it affects everybody within that family. And when we start to frame things that way, it makes it really easy to kind of say, I need to do something about this and I need to take part in preventing harm from happening to other people. And I think the world is starting to wake up to that. It's slow, that's for sure. But I hope, at least with SAFE coming online and actually having the opportunity to talk to people about these sorts of things, we've set up what we call a TFA, or Tech Facilitated Abuse Matrix, that is built on MITRE ATT&CK because it's open source. It goes through the behaviors and looks at, what does harm look like? What would you feel like you're experiencing, especially from the tech lens, because so many people find this stuff so difficult, and saying, I think this is happening to me, and explaining what it looks like and being able to bridge that gap. And once we start bridging that gap for people, it makes it so much easier to have a conversation and to start actually focusing on root cause instead of just that person's a bad person and avoiding them and let them circle the drain, so to speak.
I mean, people listening to this may be sitting there thinking, why is this a corporate issue? What have businesses got to do with it? So what's the role in business in all of this?
Every attack begins and ends with a human, fundamentally. In security, we talk so often about people being the weakest link. Fair enough, right? You can have all the technical controls in the world, and it just takes one person to break that. But we wouldn't have this business, we wouldn't have this culture, we wouldn't have anything without these people. And so people are, if anything, our greatest asset. And so why are we not doing more to protect those people? Why are we not doing more to make sure that they have psychosocial safety at work? And when we think about things like insider risk, again, what's driving that person to act that way or do that thing? As businesses, your business runs best when your people are happy. And your business runs best when your people are secure and your customers. And so we have all of these insider risk management tools and data loss prevention and all of those sorts of things. But that's very much looking after our people. And I don't think there's any alternative. If you want a business, you have to look after them in whatever shape or form that is. But that can't happen without first considering your role in that as well as a corporate enterprise.
So it's a responsibility thing as well, isn't it, amongst other things?
Absolutely.
What do you think corporate security teams can learn from the tactics used in personal tech facilitated abuse to better defend against, say, high-level spear phishing and business email compromise?
I think security teams are actually the best placed and the best people to inform on tech facilitated abuse. Our job is to understand the adversary. It is to think about all the different ways that someone could break into our environment or take advantage of our people. And social engineering and spear phishing, for example, is the perfect example of social engineering, just like a love scam is. They're the same thing, right? A great friend of mine, actually, He is let's call him a reformed Nigerian prince. He spent a lot of time being on the other side and being one of those individuals who scammed people.
Mhm.
And we've had a lot of really interesting conversations about the difference between social engineering, and there is no difference. And it goes back to, what is the adversary or the actor trying to achieve here? And that's why it's got absolutely nothing to do with the target and everything to do with, what is this person trying to achieve? If we think about it that way, there's really no difference between the two. It's just the vector that changes.
I want to move on a little bit now to look at the sort of the industry in a bit more of a broader sense. You've been a pretty vocal advocate for neurodiversity in cyber. In a sort of technical or SOC type environment, what are the specific patterns that others miss that neurodivergent professionals are perhaps uniquely wired to catch?
It's funny because in a SOC environment, I think is the perfect example of how you probably have more neurodiversity than in a typical corporate environment, at least in my experience. And I think
Right.
that's really fun. We use AI, for example. AI is built on millions and millions of data points,
Hmm.
and they all come from, let's say, a subset of the human population that
Right.
all act in a certain way. Like, the goal of AI is the path of least resistance, at least for LLMs. It's following a path to give you a response. And so if you think about people in that sort of way, if you have a group of people who are all really similar and think a similar way, you're going to get a similar response.
Right.
Now, there's a theory called Southern theory, and it speaks to that. The majority of research in the world comes from a specific subset of people, and it misses the global South. And it misses a diversity that would otherwise really enrich the research that's being done across the world. So if we think about that in terms of, the adversary is always trying to find a way to outplay the security team, the blue team. The red team is always trying to find another way to do that. If your entire blue team is thinking the same way, neurodivergent or otherwise, if they're all thinking the same way, they're going to miss things. And the red team is always going to find a way around it. I think the beauty of neurodiversity, though, is that you're coming in already at a deficit. You're already coming in with trying to find new ways of interacting with your environment. And at least in my experience of having ADHD and ASD, is that there's so much around pattern recognition just to survive in everyday life. And so when it comes to thinking about new ways of doing things, it's all right. Okay, what did I learn over here that I can apply here? And that's very much
Mm.
how SAFE came about. How can I apply security methodologies and intelligence frameworks to interpersonal harm? And so when it comes to a SOC or any environment, when you have a diverse group of people thinking about the same problem in different ways, with different backgrounds, different experiences, you're going to get an infinitely richer understanding or solution to a problem. And especially in a SOC environment, even if you are remote and you're not seeing one another, the opportunity to think and collaborate and work together, and that goes back to, again, looking after your people, is enabling that kind of conversation and sharing and knowledge sharing. You're always going to find a better outcome. It just so happens that neurodivergent people, in many instances, have great pattern recognition skills, and that comes down to the need to survive in an environment that requires you to be really conscious of what's going on around you.
It isn't
Yes,
about having one or the other. The magic happens when you've got that blend because different
absolutely.
people see different things and they bounce off each other. And it's a fun place to be, actually, when that happens, which may sound strange when we're talking about socks and that kind of thing, but that's certainly been my experience. One of the other things I wanted to ask you, because you do advocate for, I think, pen testing your life through personal threat models. What do you actually mean by that? And perhaps more importantly, what are some of the things that we can do to run a pen test on our lives?
This was a fun one. This came out of doing a webinar for a not-for-profit in Australia that's around encouraging more women to get into security and cyber. And the conversation started thinking back around tech facilitated abuse and how can we protect ourselves and protect our loved ones, but not wait until a point where we're in that kind of survival mode of, oh my gosh, something's happened. And for everybody, when something bad happens, the frontal lobe shuts down, executive function goes out the window, and we're in a survival state where our only thing that we're focused on is what's going on right in front of us.
Right.
There's a reason why we have seatbelts. You put your seatbelt on the moment you get in the car, so you don't think about it. You don't have to think about, how do I protect myself when I'm flying through a windscreen, because there isn't that concern. So pen testing your life is about, okay, well, how can I make sure that I'm in the best possible place in the event that something does go wrong? And as our lives become more and more digital, and especially for women, but any gender or any person, we become more at risk of being the target of bad behavior, let's put it that way. And so by, I guess, pre-planning, and it's not to say that this will happen in security, we say it's not a case of if, but when. And so it's like having security controls. It's really no different to having security controls, taking both accountability for your own security, but also being proactive. And there's something really reassuring about knowing that you're okay as well. It's put on your own mask before helping others, knowing how to put that mask on before you put it on. And the same goes with digital safety as well. Because like I said, every attack begins and ends with a human. And there's been so many cases of a data breach that's resulted in someone losing their life.
I want you to look forwards now for us, if you would. So 4 or 5 years to 2030, say. How do you think the cyber workforce should evolve to really make sure that we aren't just trying to build a wall around infrastructure to protect ourselves, but actually creating a safer society for the people living within it?
I have a lot of conversations with friends of mine around the cybersecurity workforce and the next generation of young people or anyone coming into the security industry, and what that means and what that looks for. And at the same time, how does AI change that? And the things that kind of come up are, we don't have enough talent, we don't have enough people.
Mm.
And I actually think it's neither of those things. I think it's we don't have enough leadership.
Right.
Like real leadership that is really invested in the people, not just bodies. We call it a body shop in consulting, not just for a body shop and not just for skills, because as we know, any technical skill these days can be replaced by an agent, but instead focusing on investing in those people that are going to come after you. And whether that be for your own benefit or not, like people move on, we want people to grow with us. But I think for 2030 and beyond, the thing that I would like to see in leading up to that is having more people say, well, how do I foster this next generation to come through? How do I encourage an environment that enables space for neurodivergent people, for women, for gender diverse people, for anyone to find a place in this incredible industry? Because the security industry is phenomenal. There's the reason why I work here, and I absolutely love it every single day. We all have this same collective mission of, we want the next generation to love this industry just as much as we have.
Well, hopefully some of the people listening to this will take that on board and start to think a little better about how they might foster the future as they move on themselves. Emily, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing a very different perspective and some real insights into what's going on out there in the digital world, and some of those stats that you shared with us. And I'm still sitting here thinking just how horrific they are, and we must absolutely try to do something more about that. We can't carry on with that kind of behavior. So some of the things you've talked about hopefully will give people ideas as to how they can address that. And thank you so much for sharing it with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with more expert insights and thought-provoking discussions. But in the meantime, if you really enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate, review and share the podcast. If you're interested in becoming an ISF member or continuing the conversation further, please do get in touch with me at steve.durbin@securityforum.org, or indeed get hold of me on LinkedIn. And remember, you can explore all our media and resources at our website, securityforum.org.